now. Okay, I think I need to put the AV view on, get us all up there and running. Just checking the YouTube feed. All right, it looks like we are up and on. Gentlemen, welcome to our first panel discussion on the Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide, and to anybody out there watching us or watching us in the future on a recorded video, welcome to our stream and our panel discussion. Very serious issue, which all of us have been involved with and following very closely. Eamon, you've even got another in addition to the throng of people concerned about this stuff. Look, welcome to you both, Eamon Hale and Bill Westhead, and looking forward to having this discussion today. Just a couple of little pieces of housekeeping. We and for those who have not joined us on the chat as well, obviously the Royal Commission and our approach to this is we want to be trauma informed, and that's just a fancy way of saying that we're going to be sensitive to the fact that some of the topics we talk about actually could easily upset people or be a source of some issues. So let's be very, very careful about what we say, and I guess about who we're saying things about and so forth. And that's going to be very important. I guess anything you might say in the chat and so forth, we're just asking for some basic respect there for other people and their privacy and so forth. And Trent Dybel is in the background moderating that chat feed into YouTube. So Eamon and Bill, welcome.
Pleasure. Thanks very much, Mark.
I thought it might just be useful, just so people can stop hearing my voice and hear yours for a second, if each of you wouldn't mind just introducing yourselves a little bit and just maybe talk about some of the things that you've been involved with leading up to this Royal Commission. And Eamon, I might begin with you, being the youngest.
Thanks very much, Mark. Now, as Mark said, I'm Eamon Hale. I'm from the Hawthorn RSL. One of the things that I think has been really telling for me is the personal aspect of this. We've been talking about this Royal Commission now for a long time, both the lead up to it and now that it's happening. But just the knowledge, I think, for my generation especially, and for every generation who've served, this isn't just happening at the moment with our public hearings. It's happening all around Australia with the flow-ons from those public hearings. And that's certainly something I've been noticing, is that we have our public hearings, they're reported, and then we're seeing flow-on effects amongst the veteran community and amongst their friends and family all across Australia.
Yes, indeed. And Bill?
Good evening, all. Bill Westhead, Media Past President, Warragul RSL, and I chaired the Victorian RSL advisory panel for the submission to the Royal Commission, which is hung off the RSL Victoria website. And I come to this essentially for the same reasons as Eamon, that as a president and a leader of a committee, an executive committee, we were doing an enormous amount of work on behalf of the government, whichever department you want to aim at, to keep veterans alive. And that really precipitated the desire to get involved, get a Royal Commission, and then get evidence before the Royal Commission.
So, Eamon and Bill, you've had a long history with this. I mean, when we go back to even before, well before the Royal Commission, we had in place the commissioner under Lynn Boss. And Eamon, I think, were you involved in that in a submission with the Senate inquiry in relation to this?
Yeah, certainly. We were really proud of that our RSL, we were one of a large group. I mean, not trying to claim any credit at all, but there's been a very large group of people pushing for this Royal Commission, pushing for some sort of detailed and serious look into this. Our RSL did present to the Senate. President Lucas Moon did that. Really, really proud of that submission and what happened there. Brigadier Bernadette Boss, fantastically qualified, very, very intelligent and knowing individual. But our submission and our point as the Hawthorn RSL was that we didn't think that the Commissioner was giving it the gravity that it deserved. I think a Royal Commission into Veteran Suicide, this isn't just a couple of suicides over a brief period. This is 120 years of Australians who've served the nation committing suicide at a disproportionate rate. And we felt that that was certainly deserving of a Royal Commission. And someone like Bill, who's with us tonight, we're really lucky to have Bill, because Bill has been one of the great people who's pushed this amongst, again, that large cohort of others. But Bill's one of the people who is responsible for this. And that's something I'm really happy to be able to spend time with Bill and talk to him about this sort of thing.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yep, I thought the Bernadette Boss report was excellent, but it highlighted the limitation of the Commissioner as opposed to a Royal Commission, because she was, and complained of the fact that she wasn't in receipt of all the information that was required. And her report needs to be commended and serves as a backbone for the Royal Commission, and also it serves as a wake-up call to all those other reports that have been done over the last 20 years that relate to veteran suicide or veteran health, which is where veteran suicide emanates from. And that needs to be tied together. That's why we needed a Royal Commission to take all the information from those great reports and bind it in under the auspices of a government commissioned organisation, which the Royal Commission is.
Yeah.
And the Royal Commission has powers beyond Senator Molan and Bernadette Boss. But Bernadette's material, I think Bernadette should be used in this Royal Commission as the person who is the go-to to fix those problems that are present, are not going to go away, and emanate from the Royal Commission. And I've got something to say on that a bit later.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll pick up on that again, because there's a lot of things to talk about. I wanted to just briefly cover the history of it, but I don't want to break over the coals of the politics of it. But the politics actually interrupted this Royal Commission seriously. And in some ways, we can feel that there's a bit of a loss of time. But as Bill's just pointed out, Bernadette Boss has actually done some terrific work and worked very hard. Even under criticism, we criticised the appointment, not her personally, but just the issue of the way the government handled it, her connections with defence and all those sorts of things. It made it to a point where that commissioner role was almost impossible for it to be successful, and it was inevitable therefore that the Royal Commission would end up being called. But the delays and all the other things that go around it, and the pain that people had to relive again as they express their anguish once more to try and get people to listen. And there were so many people involved in this, and some of them have already been, or we've spoken to quite a few on AVN, and some of them have already appeared in the first round of as witnesses in the first few blocks of hearings. The coercive powers, I think, I found very interesting, Bill. And one of the things that I noted, there was something, I've actually got a note here somewhere, there was something like 22,000 documents, if I think from memory, I can't find my note, but 22,000 documents have been gained through the coercive powers that the Royal Commission has. And they talked about some 600 plus submissions that they've already received. They also talked about 900 or so emails and hundreds of phone calls. So this is extraordinary within such a short amount of time that we've had all that, and we've had some very interesting, some very powerful testimonies from witnesses, from both people who've had direct what they call lived experience, have been through it, or they've been through some aspect of it, and also people who are working to research and treat some of the issues that are connected with suicide. So it's been quite telling so far, I would say.
The coercive powers thing is very interesting, and with the number of ICACs and IBACs and investigative bodies that are around the country, and they're very good at getting to the truth. And one must give accolades to the Attorney General's Department and Darren Chester. I know that that's not a popular sign, because they enabled the terms of reference to be extremely wide-ranging and able to go the next step and look at issues that they believe may be present within the system outside the term of reference. So
it was quite a concern for a short while as it was leading up to this, that the powers may not, or the terms of reference may not be wide-ranging enough, Bill. And you expressed those concerns on our program a couple of times. Or are you satisfied that the terms of reference is right for this now?
I think the terms of reference are sufficient, more than sufficient, to be able to get to the nub of the problem. And
what about some of your members? Have they spoken about any of this at this point?
That's actually a really interesting question, Mark, and I was hoping you'd ask me. What we've seen, we're talking about those numbers, and they are really big numbers. The submissions have already been quite large. What we're seeing, and I find this fascinating, is that I think for a lot of people, these are fairly traumatic experiences, I'm understating it there, but trauma, can be done in different ways and experienced in different ways. We found a lot of people wanted to make submissions early and did.
Yes.
And as an RSL, we tried to facilitate that. What we found recently, though, is since the Royal Commission started, since people have seen the courage of others standing up and making their submissions, we've had an influx. And it is a genuine influx of people approaching us at the RSL, whether they're members of ours or not, asking how they go about making a submission, to the point that we've actually engaged some lawyers pro bono to start. We've got 5 trial cases at the moment who are doing who are laying out a template essentially. We've had an influx of people wanting to make those submissions because they've seen others doing it, and it's fantastic. A lot of the people who are making their submissions, the strength and the courage that they've shown to do so, and I think I do want to talk about it a bit later, but it's been amazing. The trauma, like I said, is experienced differently for different people. To relive it, to stand up, to make their submission, and then to in person go in there and make it again is just phenomenal. And I'm really proud and inspired by a lot of the people who are making submissions, because it's so hard.
And some of these people have been making submissions and advocating all along. And I'm thinking particularly of Nikki Jamieson, who's appeared twice on the witness list. Once as a person with lived experience, and the second time as a qualified PhD in suicidology. Obviously. That led her down that path, unfortunately, but fortunate for many others, hopefully, with her insights and so forth, and having the courage to get up and do that and follow that pathway. And of course, Julianne Finney, who was on this program a couple of times, and I remember asking her before the Royal Commission was announced that, are you prepared to go through this, even if it doesn't give you the results that you want? And she said yes. So there are risks with this for them. And they're embracing it and they're doing it. So I think that is one of the big positives. You can see the resilience in some folk, but I do worry that there are others who won't feel capable or want to step forward. And I'm also worried that there may be a cohort of people, and we know through our own research there is a cohort of people, 70s, 80s and 90s, veterans who are almost invisible, and we don't know if some of them have died and whether they died by suicide, and whether their deaths have ever been connected with their military service, and what's happened since then. So there are some serious gaps that the Royal Commission may never uncover as well.
And if I can jump in there, Mark, one of the things that's really concerned me and has required it's been really tough, but what we've seen is, again, a lot of, how do I say this sensitively, but we had a submission recently by the family of a friend of mine who unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago. And I'm sure, I hope they'll watch this, and they were amazing. They were absolutely fantastic. The strength they showed was just fantastic, not only to share their story, but to share their son's story. And he had such a great story, but a really, really tough experience for people like myself to reconcile the person they were talking about to the soldier that I knew who was tough and strong. And and just an outstanding bloke. So to reconcile those two things was really hard. And what I found, and this is my experience of just last week, is that one of my mates who was following that in the news, and one of the issues we have with the media is that ability to sensationalise. They sensationalised it. It was all over the newspapers, and one of my mates took it really hard, and unfortunately had to go to hospital as a he was sectioned, unfortunately, because he then it was too much for him, and he had to go to hospital.
I think we might come back to that topic of sensationalising this thing. And as I said at the beginning, we don't want to sensationalise anything. We don't want to fan any anger or anything like that. I mean, we want to have a serious and proper conversation about it. And I want to just bring it to, for those who haven't really had a chance to engage with the Royal Commission or watch any of the streams, and they're all available on their site to review. A good starting point is the opening. I think they called it a ceremony, the commencement ceremony of it. It was actually very good because it actually outlined quite a lot about their approach. But one of the things that I was really struck by is just the quality of the people chosen to be part of the Royal Commission. I'm not sure if you guys have got a view, but I'm very impressed with Nick Caldos, James Douglas, and Peggy Brown seem very competent and excellent in their field. And I think the two councillors assisting, which is I think Kevin Connor and Peter Gray, I think from memory, have just handled themselves very well with the families with great sensitivity and caution. And I really think that they're doing a great job, and all the background work that they're doing to, obviously there's a huge team behind it to facilitate the communications and coordinate things has been excellent. So have you guys got any comments on that? Maybe Bill?
Yeah, I have. What we have to do is regenerate confidence in the system, and the selection of the commissioners generates that confidence. Nick Caldas has a very strong background in operational policing and then strategically operational policing, covering the gamut and he has developed, and I know this well, that he has a relationship with the ADF operations. The psychological support from the other commissioners and the jurisprudence support is huge, and confidence is going to be the biggest issue I think the government faces, is to how to regenerate or affirm the confidence in the ADF, the DVA, and the public services that's veteran health. This process is a long process. It's going to be 2 years for the evidence. There's an interim report. I'd like to see more interim reports. Then there's the report, and then consideration by the government of the day. So it's got to get traction in the workplace of the ADF where our veterans are. We can't afford to wait 5 years for that traction to occur.
Yeah, and this is the important thing, isn't it, Bill? We've got to get some immediate. I mean, I've been watching, as much as I can, and doing the catch-up watching of the eyewitness testimonies, hearings, and it's just been the insights and the suggestions that have come forward, particularly from some of the sort of more expert witnesses, the doctors and who are running special practices and things like that, have just been. Some of these ideas are just incredibly powerful. They need to be looked into immediately, probably, and some of them probably could almost be just implemented. And so there needs to be, and I certainly hope they're good for their word, that particularly DVA and Defence, that they're watching the Royal Commission closely and they will make changes as required. I certainly don't think we need to wait too much for all this. I mean, there is research, and research is required, but it takes an enormous amount of time. But the research in many cases has already been done, and we can dust it off, and we can actually do things, and we can actually try some experiments of things that we know that won't make things any worse, at least. So I think that's important. Did you have any sort of sense when you look at the witnesses coming through, and Bill's talking about confidence, the selection of the witnesses? Have you got any comments about that?
I just think, just to go back to that point about confidence, Nick Caldos and co have been one of the big fears, I think, for a lot of people was, and this is where, Brigadier Boss, as I said before, hugely experienced, overqualified, just a really brilliant person for the role. However, wasn't seen as being objective. And that was, obviously she is objective, but she's tainted already by her ADF service, unfortunately, in this regard. Nick Caldos is above that. He's seen as being an objective person. I think we're very early here, and I don't want to jinx anything, but he's already, I think, gained the confidence of a lot of people. And that's why we're seeing more and more submissions. Now that people know that they can make those submissions, they are confident that they're making submissions to people who will listen to them. I think we're going to see more and more.
Can I outline a concern? I'll be interested in your comments on this, both of you. I'm very interested in the witnesses, obviously. I'm also very interested in people being able to get a voice in very serious topics as sort of self-appointed spokespeople. There's plenty of it, out there, and without sort of bringing in others. And I sort of worry about when you get certain witnesses in. I'm not going to name anybody or anything like that, but I do remember seeing a number of testimonies, and I was actually a little concerned about, what's this witness got saying? They've got a clear point of view, and they've somehow got a platform, but who's able to sift through that? And I'm sure the Commission's got enough experience, but I do worry about those who aren't there to sort of, show themselves off or and I know that's meant they're doing it with I guess a great deal of, integrity and sincerity, but there still needs to be some sort of careful consideration of certain individual witnesses along the way, I suppose, particularly those who are offering services or particular solutions. I'm not talking about necessarily lived experience folk. So it's just how do we make sure that, or how do the commissioners make sure that they're reaching out to to people who are in the know?
Bill, do you want to go with that one?
I believe that the people with lived experiences and the witnesses we've seen, most of the witnesses we've seen so far, have contributed positively to the Royal Commission. Where I draw the line, and it is using the Royal Commission to push an agenda, and I believe that the commissioners will see through that when the evidence is presented. And this is an emotional issue, so to present evidence unemotionally is going to be very difficult. But the submissions should reflect a degree of evidentiary role. But the commissioners will see those people who are pushing a barrow. Yeah,
and so they've got an ex-service organisation that they're part of, and they're trying to, they think they've got the solution, and obviously they're going to push their solution is good, or their solution is one of the right ways to go, etc., etc. So, and the ex-service organisations, as we've experienced, probably have been fairly absent in some regards to a lot of this, and some of them actually don't represent many people either. They represent only a small group of people. So I think there's some of that needs to be understood as well.
I think one of the things we'll see from the Royal Commission is a better understanding of what ESOs in Australia are providing. At the moment, we do have, if I talk about the RSL, we started off, I think, this position of supporting a Royal Commission, I think we started off as a small minority within at least RSL Victoria. And we built a level of support. People like Bill were part of that. Others within the RSL built and built and built until we had majority support in Victoria. Victoria then took that. We voted at state conference, and RSL Victoria took the position that as a whole we supported the Royal Commission. We saw opposition to that again and again. And I think...
Well, the RSL National President, Greg Mellick, said on an interview that I did with him, actually, and I quite enjoyed the interview, by the way, but he said that he didn't think the Royal Commission was the right way to go. Now, I think, well, we'll see down the track, but I certainly see a lot of benefits from the way this has been conducted. And obviously there was the way the alternative was implemented was never going to succeed in the form that it was, and there's no way to resurrect it. So
that's right. Yeah, the alternative just wasn't.
ESOs have got a lot to answer for, as far as I'm concerned.
If I can make a really strong statement, and I make it as someone from my RSL, the conversations we have with people, ESOs over the last 20, 30 years haven't done a good job, and you could argue they've failed. And you can argue the RSL has been an organisation just staggering in the last 20 or 30 years. This has been the Royal Commission. It's a really good thing for veterans around Australia. It's a really good thing for the RSL because we're out to do our jobs. We're out to advocate for our veterans. We're out to advocate for people who aren't our veterans. But all around Australia at the moment, RSLs are supporting people. And I think we're going to be able to see what ESOs around the country are doing. There's a huge plethora of RSLs around the country.
It's an interesting point that you raise, Eamon, and I think this Bill will have a comment about this, is that there is a role for ESOs to advocate strongly, and we could have a whole session on what sort of businesses ESOs should be, whether it's art unions or poker machines or whatever. That's a different and also very interesting and important conversation. But how much of the business of the government or what the work of the government have the ESOs taken up on these issues and well-being issues and welfare issues that really should be lying fairly and squarely at the hands of the government? Bill, I don't know if you got a comment about that.
How long have you got?
We'll give you a few minutes, mate.
So, point number one, ESOs have been doing the work of government, in particular of DVA. Point number two is leadership. And not only in the ESO space, but certainly in the ADF space. If there are issues that are starting to come to the surface at the Royal Commission, these issues have been there for a long time. And they haven't been knocked on the head, as the evidence has shown. Now, we are taught as NCOs and officers to give advice without fear or favour, and we've lost that. We've lost that ability to provide leadership, and the Eamons and the Lucases and yourself of the world have taken up that leadership cudgel because there is a leadership vacuum. And that applies across the board. It applies in the RSL. And to give credit where credit's due, I have had nothing but full support from Mark Webster and Brian Kent's in relation to the submission that we put together. Great support. But we drove it. We drove it because we were serial pests and dropping emails and saying, what's your position on this? That is not universal throughout the RSL infrastructure in this country. And the RSL has to look at itself and say, do you want to survive? If you want to survive, you have to capture the veterans. And if the young veterans do not go to the RSL will wither. That's why it's so important that we display the leadership required and shown by our forebears.
Yeah, and we need a peak organisation, I'm afraid to say. I think there's a lot of people been trying to bring up, alternatives, but those alternatives just don't have the history or, the infrastructure or the wealth the RSL has. But the RSL has got many, many problems that is actually preventing itself from moving forward. But I would say in the last 2 years, we have seen some improvements in some areas. And I think they've made some significant improvements, actually. But still, the issue of leadership is an area that I've criticised quite a bit, as you probably know, particularly, what's going on, or what has been going on in Victoria. We seem to have lost Bill for a second.
We've lost Bill briefly, but just on that, I think what's interesting is in the last 30 years, we've seen the ADF at an operational tempo that it's never seen before. And Bill's very passionate on this subject, but the ADF over the last 30 years has been a really, really busy organisation. We've deployed more soldiers more often than we ever have before, as far as I'm aware. What's interesting is that the ESOs, while the ADF was working in this high-tempo environment, the ESOs were operating almost in a vacuum. Whilst the ADF has increased its tempo, we've seen the ESOs drop theirs off. And I think that's why we're seeing this Royal Commission now, is because it's come to a head. We've gotten to a point now where those who are transitioning out of defence are transitioning out of defence into a community, into an environment, into a society that do not get them, that don't understand them. If we look at Georgia Ash from Mates for Mates, and Mates for Mates is an organisation at RSL Queensland who are, and I'm going to say it as loud as I can, RSL Queensland are the leaders within the RSL space. Georgia Ash made a statement, and I'll read it because I wrote it down. I thought it was that good. And she was talking about that transition picture, saying they struggle with everything from finding employment to just in general interactions in the community. The hypermasculinity needs to be explained to them, why they may feel so detached from their emotions. This is really crucial. We need to have an ADF that is, perhaps hypermasculine is the wrong word, but the ADF, it's not just a government organisation. The ADF doesn't organise policy, doesn't organise funding transport. The ADF is an organisation that's there to kill bad guys, to kill our enemies, and so it needs to be. It's
not a public service organisation. Yet we try to. I mean, what used to drive me nuts, still does, is when they try to publish equivalencies between ranks and public service levels and things like that. I think it's the biggest nonsense in the world. But there is a very unique and special role the ADF does, and it's not necessarily all that pleasant, and it requires a certain type of attitude and a certain type of training. And Bill, I mean, you and I have spoken about this a few times. I mean, how would you summarise the issues with transition from terms of we've got to have a warfighting capability, and we can't just be kumbaya all the time.
Well, let me say.
I think. Well, I don't know about you, Eamon. I'm not getting Bill to you.
Country Gippsland doesn't look very good. Here he is.
Okay, start again, Bill. We've lost you for a sec.
The ADF is not a social experiment. The ADF is there designed to prosecute government policy, often using violence. So we train our people accordingly. In doing so, we actually change their personalities. We do put in their hyper-vigilance, hyper masculinity, I'll say that, and elitist views. We truly believe that we're elite. Now, you transfer that out of transition into a civilian community, and we hit the wall. Also, we don't look after those people who, for injury reasons or just not suitability, have missed that boat and get lopped off on the side. And that's a statistical anomaly that is way outside the norm. So we need to understand that we're different. We're trained on behalf of the government. The government has a responsibility to detune us before we go out and be productive members of the community. Military service should not preclude you from being a productive person receiving the same standard of living when they leave the military. And that's not the case at the moment.
One of the things too, I think a really consistent theme we've seen so far with the submissions from the medical specialists, and we saw it from Deborah Cornwall, Kieran McCarthy and Rob Martin. Those that I was really inspired by them. I thought they made great submissions over the last few days. And one of the consistent themes was that those who are getting medically discharged, the level of injury, again, the ADF isn't, it's not touch rugby. It's a contact sport. We send people into harm's way. We have an expectation that they may be injured, they may be killed. We accept that. We accept a level of risk in everything we do in the ADF. And so what we're finding is those who've been medically discharged, they're the ones that are really, really screaming out for help. And they're the ones that we really need to look at that model on how we're going to manage someone's identity. When you join the Army or Air Force or Navy at 17, 18 years old, or however old you join, it isn't just a job, it is a lifestyle. You embrace that lifestyle. And when you leave it, whether you leave it after 4 years or 40 years, you're no longer, like Bill said, we've changed that person. And especially that medical discharge, because there's no choice. When they leave, there's no choice anymore. A lot of them feel like their identity's been robbed off them. And so those three medical specialists, one of the consistent theme they were saying was that the level of injury, the level of both physical and mental injury that doctors are dealing with is not something they're used to in the civilian community. And it's something doctors are struggling with, and they're just leaving. they're not able to cope with that level of trauma that
well, they're not being. It's clear from the testimonies that they're not even being supported properly. They get to do a 45-minute consult maximum once every day or something, and sometimes they need to do a hell of a lot more than that. There were problems with organising medical peer conferences across specialists who are helping a veteran across different things, and being able to work as a team to provide a level of support. It's all just sort of broken up into little coded activities that can be built across the DVA. So a lot of them are doing, from what I've heard, a lot of free work, and are getting burnt out themselves. And I think from a sociological perspective, I mean, as you know, I've been doing a bit of academic stuff on this, and this identity thing is super, super important. And I think we don't understand it fully yet. One of the testimonies I recall was Dr. Phil Parker, who talked about an alternative model. This is just one of the little insights that I thought was just very interesting, and it was just an interesting idea. Who said, "Well, look, football teams, don't train to be 100% ready for them, for the grand final every week of the year. They have an off season. They have this rotational thing where they're not constantly at this forever heightened of readiness and fitness and so forth." And he suggested a more intelligent model of having various parts of the Defence Force ready at heightened areas and heightened capability and so forth. And this is obviously particularly a bit of a thing in the Arms Corps, where no matter which regimental environment you're in, which people want to be at peak fitness 100% of the time, was my experience. So there was never any sort of sense of when the off season was going to be. So I don't know. There's new ways, I think, to start looking at this, and I think we can be more intelligently informed by approaches from areas outside of the military, actually.
Well, we are. We are doing that, with the level of readiness. So week before last, our people, with very little notice and heads up, went across to the Solomons for the riots, and onto Bougainville. So so we have a scale up readiness, and certainly special forces have got that, and it exists in across the ADF environment. Do we need to train to that level all the time? Well, things pop out at no notice, and the people who went to the Sollies have to be replaced by people to do their normal tasks. So they need to be at a level of a standard. Yeah. The issue here is preparing for that standard, and then the maintenance of that standard. And we are involved in an organisation that you get injured. If you're a high level of fitness, carrying big weights around the place, throwing yourself out of vehicles onto rocky ground, you're going to get hurt.
It's guaranteed, isn't it, Bill?
Guaranteed.
Yeah.
Where we have lost the plot is that we've lost our organic medical support and management. And organic means unit. And we can have the scale up, as the specialists say. We need that management of both preparation, maintenance, and rehabilitation, and that's gone.
There's a bigger issue here then, is there, perhaps, and I don't know if you've seen this change. So I've certainly witnessed it from the sidelines. As this, once upon a time, we used to have this sort of regimental approach to things, and we had the regimental medical officer, and people were very strongly connected to their regiment, their messes, all these different things, and there's this sort of sense of wider community connection through regimental life was a big thing. And now we're seeing people deployed and just thrown together to create formations and task groups and things like that. Now, I'm not really completely up to date with how all that works, but from what I've been hearing is that whole sense of regimental family, which is actually a big support mechanism, may not be as strong as it once was.
I think culture changes. I think the Army, Navy, Air Force, and I say Army in the wide sense, I suppose. I'm including Navy and Air Force when I say Army, so apologies to anyone who might, when I inadvertently do it. But the Army of the 70s isn't the Army of the 80s. The Army of the 80s isn't the Army of the 90s. And the Army of the 90s is not the Army of 2021. I think culture changes. What doesn't change, though, is that, like I said earlier, that disproportionate rate of veteran suicide for 120 years. What does change is the environment that those people, Army, Navy, Air Force members came back to in the 1920s, 1950s, post-Vietnam. That they were whole wars, or they were whole societal wars. The entire society was supportive. They understood, and everyone was affected by the First World War, Second World War, and Vietnam to a lesser extent. I mean, Vietnam, the numbers are obviously very different to the Second World War, but people had an understanding. There was huge issues for that Vietnam generation. What we're seeing now, though, is a society that is totally disconnected to overseas service. I think there was a study done by the Australian Defence Association in 2011 that suggested something like 22,000 Australian families were affected by overseas deployments of a country of, at that stage, 22 or 23 million people. 22,000 people were affected by Iraq and Afghanistan deployments, which shows that disconnect between society. We've all experienced it. Everyone who's served in the ADF has experienced it when they meet someone in the street who, as an example, in Brisbane, we used to go out in Brisbane, and Brisbane is a garrison town, essentially. The 7th Brigade is huge, and people in Brisbane CBD would say to us, "Oh, I didn't know there was an army base here." Our society does not understand ADF service. It doesn't understand an organisation that, in the background of our country, accepts risk. No other organisation in Australia accepts it. So when people transition out, they transition out to a society that doesn't understand them, and that's where the RSL and DVA and the ESOs and all these organisations are experiencing things in a different way to how they did in the 1920s and 30s. You know, we're not doing it as well as we used to do.
So there needs to be more adaptability in those organisations, and it's got to be done in a more intelligent way. And obviously the bureaucracy and, one of the big issues of the background papers provided by the Department of Defence and the background paper provided by DVA in particular talked about just the trouble that they have in dealing with the regulatory environment. The
DVA is going to find itself. The DVA is going to get smashed by this Royal Commission. I think we all know that. I think DVA know that. DVA are already changing things and doing things differently, but they're swamped. DVA cannot keep up with demand at the moment, and that is a huge issue for those who need help, and they need help. Organisations like Open Arms are still fantastic. They do huge amounts of work.
Can that help exist in the same organisation that's there to, judge, a claim and manage the bureaucracy of a claim? Are they the same organisation can actually do that? I'm actually starting to wonder, because obviously a lot of that support work is shifted over to ex-service organisations, but I'm just wondering if the government ought to be thinking about the fundamental structure of having a greater level of support function that actually is not managed within an organisation such as DVA.
Bill can talk to this point far better than I can, but one of the giant failings we see is that an organisation like the RSL, veterans who are making claims require advocates. That adversarial system, that adversarial organisation or way of doing claims, we train people from the age of 17, 18 a lot of the time to move past injury. We say, righto, you're in pain right now, but we teach people what their limits are in the ADF. We push them to their limits. They don't ask for help. We don't ask for help because we're always looking out for each other. And then we expect them to get out of the ADF and just put their hand up and say, hey, my knee's pretty bad, I need some help. And when they do that, we don't necessarily process their claims like we should. Therefore, they not only need to put their hand up and say, I'm injured, I'm hurting, I need help, but they need to put their hand up and talk to an advocate who will then fight for them and make sure they're looked after. And I don't think that's a very good system. I think that's a giant failing. Bill?
It's funding. It's that simple. It's funding. The recent changes to DVA is through funding. Now there are squillions of dollars around at the moment. We come through COVID. We spent a significant amount of money on welfare. We're spending money on Black Hawks. We're spending money on nuclear, developing nuclear submarines. If you don't look after your people, those things become nugatory. And the amount of money that needs to be spent on DVA, and there's management issues, but they need money now to solve the claims issues. And The reality is, due to the operational intensity over the last 20 odd years, the evidence is that these people will show greater propensity for injury and illness than their previous generation, because they've been flogged. Now, the system needs money to support these people and process these people. And the pressure should come via the RSL, other ESOs, directly on to the Department of Finance and the Treasury, who are not supplying DVA with the requested funds in order to carry out their task.
Here's an important question, Bill and Eamon. We talk about, funding and supporting veterans. You talk about military capabilities, submarines, helicopters, all that kind of stuff. But I sort of wonder whether somebody's missing the point that if you don't invest in taking care of, the veteran community, what does that do to our future military capability? So this Royal Commission, for example, is exposing a lot of things. Will that impact ADF recruitment, for example? These things are vital and this community support for veterans is vital for the bigger capability of actually having those people wanting to join and being part of it, and actually being part of this. Once you've been in it, that's it. You're never the same again as you realise. So as most people would realise. So it's a big step that people are taking when they do this sort of thing and join the Defence Force. So are we looking at? Do you think the politicians are looking at it in the right way and understanding it in the right way? That this is actually part of the military capability, and we've actually got to spend this money if you want to have a solid military capability overall.
Further to Eamon's previous point about the knowledge in the community, and I'm pretty close to some of the politicians. Politicians have very limited knowledge of military capability or service life.
Yeah,
that's our fault. We haven't told them. We haven't, as an ESO, advocated as hard as we are required to by our constitutions. We haven't told them what's on. You go and speak to politicians, and you then go into detail about our conditions and obligations, and they're staggered. Yet these politicians are the same people who throw our people into bushfires, throw our people into COVID, and I know one or two people who are in my a friend of mine's cohort who hadn't had proper leave for 2 years, and they've been deployed overseas into fires and into COVID. You've got to look after your manpower, and we have not, our ADF leadership have not informed the politicians well enough on our obligations, and nor have we informed the public.
Have they got the courage to do so? I'm starting to wonder whether they're displaying that sort of courage. I mean, we saw, the CDF stand up and basically deny any responsibility of leadership for the issues that he outlined that he thought were important in the Brereton inquiry, and said, well, nobody above the rank of lieutenant was not involved and didn't see it. And I mean, what happened to their curiosity during their deployment? What were they doing? What were they thinking? What was going on with that whole system that they led? I mean, and then to front up to a press conference like that and say those things, and I personally thought he would have resigned there and then. He didn't. So I think there's a real failing of leadership at the very highest level, in my view.
If I can jump in, I think, and this. I hope it's not a controversial opinion, but I think the ADF right now is the most professional it's ever been. I think the soldiers, sailors, and aviators within it are the most professional we've ever seen in Australia's history. I think where we're failing our people is once they leave. I think the level of professionalism and excellence within the ADF, that's easy to see. It's post their service, when they move into that DVA ESO space, that the professionalism and excellence just isn't matched. And I'll speak as an RSL person, as a member of my RSL, we have not done our jobs for 20 or 30 years, potentially longer than that. We have not been excellent. We haven't been performing professionally, and we've let our people down. And I think one of the reasons, this may be another controversial thing, I think one of the reasons that we've had this epidemic of suicide is because ESOs have not been there to, once people transition out of the ADF, they don't have a natural home within society. And that should be organisations like the RSL. Because the RSL hasn't been doing it, we've seen others spring up. We've seen Young Veterans and Soldier On and Bravery Trust and all these other organisations have to spring up. And the job is too big. We've got an organisation like the RSL that should be doing
experience, and they don't have any history in it. Look, I think I want to pick you up on a point there, Eamon. I think it's an interesting one. But also, while I do this, I just want to remind anybody who's watching it and they want to make a comment or ask a question, please feel free to type it in, and Trent will pass it on to us to look at. You talk about professionalism. I mean, what is professionalism, Eamon? Because everybody feels that they're doing a good job, they've worked hard, they're training hard, etc., etc. But professionalism is more than the individual. It's the sum of the parts, and the sum of the parts has to include leadership, and that leadership also doesn't just end with the Chief of the Defence Force, but it ends with the Minister and Prime Minister and Cabinet and so forth. I mean, these are the people who've been overseeing the operational tempo. These are the people who are providing the governance, supposedly, for these deployments and seeing what's happened. And I'm not blaming any particular political party at all. This is across the board, and I think this links into maybe a future conversation about how the ADF is deployed, and what deployment, how that deployment comes about. Obviously, things need to happen extremely quickly, but I would also suggest that you need to have a think about what the mechanism might be for a deployment to be properly and duly signed off, whether it requires a discussion in Parliament, or whatever. I don't know, but
it's also consistency. I think, Mark, we need consistent support. In the 1990s in Victoria, so those who are watching who know Ward 17 in Victoria, Ward 17 was Ward 17, and there was also there was a small house nearby which was essentially named after a battle in Vietnam. So when the Heidelberg Repat was handed over to, went from being a specialist organisation for defence and the war widows in the 1990s, Marie Tehan, who was a member of Jeff Kennett's government at the time, said that veterans will always be welcome here. We'll always have a place for veterans at Ward 17. That, unfortunately, that statement was made in the 1990s when veterans overwhelmingly were majority of whom would have been men in their 60s, 70s and 80s at that stage. She made that statement prior to East Timor. And over time, again, the ADF has worked in this hugely high tempo environment, and we haven't seen that reflected in the rest of society. Society haven't kept up. And so when Mrs. Tehan makes that statement in the 1990s, 30 years later, it's not true anymore. Somewhere like Ward 17 do a fantastic job, but they are not set up for those who are at risk and those who need help right now. I mean, there's still a waiting list to get into Ward 17, which is just horrific. For those who need it, and those who've gone there will overwhelmingly say that Ward 17 has either saved their life or was a life-defining moment for them. The argument could be that there's not enough customers and clientele for them, but if they save one life, they've done their job. And veterans, it's very different. It's very different to the rest of society. A suicidal veteran is not a suicidal normal member of society because their experiences are different, that what they're going through is different. And when we put them into the public system, which is where those at risk get put at the moment, it doesn't work and it isn't right and it isn't fair for them. Someone who served their nation needs to be looked after differently. And I'm not saying that everyone who serves in the ADF is special and needs special care, but I am saying that, I suppose. If you served in the ADF, your experiences are going to be different to the person that you're laying next to in a hospital bed in the public system, and that needs to be addressed. And that's one of the things I hope we find from the Royal Commission is that each capital city needs a specialist.
It's at the tail end of things, but my argument that I'm developing now is that it's actually part of our capability. Because if we're unable to demonstrate that we can look after you at the end of it, why would you want to join it at the beginning of it? I guess is the simple way to put it. Now our time is we're getting close to the end of the time. I don't see any questions coming through or comments coming through that we want to put up at this stage. I'm happy to go with, I guess, just some final observations or insights from the Royal Commission so far. There's been a lot to see and talk about, and I think there's probably a few little threads that we might discuss later on about what we might put a spotlight on in a future discussion. But Bill, I might ask you first. Have you got any sort of final insights or comments?
I possibly diverge a little bit from Eamon and take up your points. I think there is a leadership problem in the ADF.
Yeah.
And it saddens me to say that as an ex-Army officer. We are professional, and certainly coming back in when I did, I saw the difference in the professionalism. We're suffering from a number of things in the cohort in the 90s onwards. We suffered from the long peace. So when suddenly all these operational deployments came around, we were like gut scrubbers at a 500 match. You know, you were looking. Yeah, I can go. And there's the money, and we deserve the money, but it probably got out of hand, and it got out of hand because of decisions made back in 1975 on manning and capping the levels of size of the military. We haven't kept up with either the threat analysis or the change in GDP or the change in the population. And as we look in the gene pool for recruitment, are your parents going to let really smart kids go into the military with a history over 100 years of damage after service? Now, that doesn't happen to all people. I must stress that. But this Royal Commission has been brought about because there are inadequacies in the looking after the health of the veteran, which lead back, is this a good thing for us? So,
which leads back to the capability question, right?
Correct.
Yep.
And this is what the government has to really concern itself about and get this right, and get it right relatively quickly, because the threats are out there, and you need to have that change. For people to do 10, 12, 15 tours over 4 or 5 operations, I truly worry about them. And I've seen it as an RSL president. I've seen the damage that it's done. And that's an ADF leadership issue. It's a government issue, the government of the day, saying we need to chuck more money at this. And when the Royal Commission will provide an analysis of decision making over 30 or 40 years that will be an indictment on those decisions.
It's certainly has a lot of material to sift through, and I certainly hope they've got the support that they need to do it, because it's just an enormous body of work that needs to be revisited again. And the number of submissions, we've been talking about 22,000 documents, 600 submissions plus, and I think they'll probably double easily by the sounds of it. I mean, particularly once it starts picking up that momentum and that the trust is starting to come through. Eamon, any final observations or comments?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of points I wouldn't mind hitting on, but I'll be really quick about it. Going back to my earlier point, I think the courage of the families who've been putting their hand up and telling not just their story, but the stories of their loved ones, that needs to be commended. I couldn't be prouder of the families who've put their hands up and said what they've had to say, which just must be so tough. But what we as within the veteran community and our wider community need to do is make sure that everyone who is consuming this media, and I know a lot of my friends who are my age who are spending a lot of time really focusing in on the Royal Commission and really focusing on those negatives. We need to make sure we're looking after each other, because what we're seeing again is it's not just happening when these public hearings happen in a specific place, whether it's Brisbane, Townsville, Wagga, hopefully Melbourne. We really do hope we get a hearing in Melbourne.
Yes.
While it's happening in those specific places,
doesn't happen. We'll have something to say about it.
Well, like I said, my friend the other day, he had to go to hospital because we were concerned he was going to kill himself, based off him just consuming too much of this media and remembering too much. And that's a real worry. I really hope the Royal Commission can shine a light on a lot of these issues, but
It is certainly painful to go through this now, isn't it, for everybody concerned, even just watching from the sidelines. It's a really difficult thing. I'm afraid we're out of time. So Eamon Hale and Bill Westhead, thank you both so much for your participation. I think there's a few things that we could focus in on next time. I've got a sort of an inkling that we might head down and have a closer look at transition and how actually transition works and doesn't work, because there's a lot of people transitioning from full-time to reserves, and they don't really quite have this sort of definitive moment in their actual transition out of the Army, Navy or Air Force. And also there's definitely the issue of how we transition and care for those veterans who are injured, who might like to continue to serve in some capacity if they could.
Yeah.
So there's probably a couple of topics there, because those things were raised in some of the hearings, and I think there's some really interesting aspects to that. And there's probably many more things coming up that we could probably talk about. So both of you, thank you so much for your participation and your thoughts so far. And
Thank you very much.
I hope we might be able to do it again.
Thanks, Mark. Look forward to next time.
Take care.
Thanks, guys.